It is the latest installment of the hybrid KabuKuwa line, just in time for the 4th anniversary and the first female introduced in the hybrid beetle line. It is KXK03 Black Cruz, with a brand new kit of Substitute, Revenge Sword, Max Shot, 5-head legs, and the leg ability of Contract, which is a new leg ability that negates the self-destruct penalty of self-induced attacks once. Now, as a brand new model and pretty much as a hybrid beetle, it was already kind of expected that this new model, Black Cruz, would have a hybrid design and a hybrid mastery between melee and shooting attacks, as expected by Cross Messiah, who said it first, Cross Z, Kreut Bison after him. Black Cruz is most certainly no exception. But in contrast to previous predecessors that specialize in metaforce sustain or metaforce consumption, Black Cruz takes this a whole new step further and instead specializes in controlling her own HP. Substitute is a brand new support skill introduced in the game that will buff your damage massively by an impressive 3.25 times, but of course you take a massive amount of recoil for this same amount of boost your next attack. Now, this basically puts it on the same tier as, say, Desperate, which does the same thing but with a 50% recoil, so it only makes perfect sense that Substitute does this same thing. But Substitute has a little bit more of a kick to it that makes it a more palatable, I guess you can call it, depending on what kind of build you have and how you use it. But the gimmick to Substitute is, in exchange for having this massive recoil and the damage boost, the part that is taking the recoil damage is not the part being used. Instead, it'll be the opposite part of the one being used. So say, for instance, if you used Substitute and used your right arm, well, guess what? There's a good chance your left arm is going to overload and break, but your right arm lives to fight another day. So do bear this in mind. It is a rather big gamble if you do plan to make use of that high damage output, and just make sure you control how often you plan to use it. Revenge Sword on the right arm is a fairly new skill that we've started seeing more and more recently. It was introduced, of course, with Blade Lagger from the recent Zoids collab, brought back again with Byakuyo with the Shaman King collaboration, and this is going to be the first ever instance of Revenge Sword on a female model, no less. But to explain it briefly, it does have a rather impressive base damage at about 2050 there, but it also gets a ×2 damage bonus, and I believe piercing damage as well, if the part's HP is under 50%. So this means that this is an attack and a skill that specializes in being actually beaten, not quite battered to the point of dying, but beaten to the point where you're going to be basically on the ropes. And you know what they say about cornered mice never fighting? Well, Black Cruz is about to take that and throw it out the window. Max Shot is another brand new skill being introduced in the game, and basically what it does is it gets a ×2 damage and piercing bonus if the part's HP is at 100%. And that's already saying a lot, given that much like Revenge Sword, Max Shot also has a pretty impressive base power at over 2100, and that's even before the double damage or the piercing come into effect either. So unlike Revenge Sword, where you want to keep your HP high low, Max Shot, you want to keep your HP high pretty much up to full if you want to maximize that damage bonus. 5-head legs means that Black Cruz will have pretty solid coverage across all terrains across the board when it comes to diverse coverage, and stats are actually not too shabby either. Not necessarily absurdly tanky as, say, Metabi or Musha Beetle might, for instance, but she's still packing some pretty healthy stats across the board too. When it comes to armor, she's packing about 3540 for the head part, about 37, almost 3800 there for that right arm, about 35, almost 3600 for that left arm, and just shy of 3600 for the legs as well. But this is also assuming full level 100 specs, which I will officially be commenting on going forward thanks to the new update as of last week on January 18th, 2024. So these stats might look just a little bit different or just a little bit more aggressive than what you'd normally expect fully capped at 5-star, but it's still going to be a very nasty bonus and very powerful specs across the board as well when mentioned. Leg stats are also really nice too. A base mobility of almost 1,000 at 971 means that she's definitely going to have the speed bonus at her advantage as well. A max evade of 1051 isn't too shabby. She will dodge or graze essentially as she pleases, but not too terrible, not too bad of a rate either. Melee resist of 893 and a shoot resist of 938 is probably going to be one of her big weaknesses. Now, in contrast to her arms, which have some pretty healthy HP numbers, the damage reduction isn't terrible, but it's also not absurdly good either. So do bear in mind and do make sure you exercise an air of caution if you are going to make use of Black Cruz in any capacity, since she will be just a little squishy on the armor and probably take a lot more punish damage than what you'd anticipate or expect while she's on the field. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I actually have to rate Black Cruz pretty highly at about an 8 out of 10 across the board. She's got good numbers, good stats, good leg speed, very good power, and even though she does look pretty gimmicky at first glance, if you use her correctly and set up your turn order properly, you can make her out to be a very nasty menace on the field from turn 2 onwards. And to basically explain that ideal turn order, basically if you use Black Cruz as a pure set, you would use Substitute on turn 1 to get that damage bonus going, so that whenever you use your next turn, it's going to have that massive damage and that recoil. Second turn, you will use Max Shot, assuming that you're still at full HP and not touched, so you'll already get that massive damage boost and the ×2 damage because the HP is at full health. But the recoil from Substitute will be diverted to Revenge Sword on her right arm instead. And thanks to the leg ability of Contract negating the recoil damage of something once, that means that instead of breaking, Revenge Sword is now sitting at 1 HP. Now, Revenge Sword only requires it being under 50%, so Black Cruz might take this a little bit to an extreme, but this guarantees you going forward that as long as you stay under that 50% mark, Revenge Sword is going to be laying waste and cutting everything down in her path no matter which way you look at it. As mixed parts, I do have to rate her just a hair lower at a 7.5 out of 10 though. Given that Substitute and Contract basically are kind of a requirement in order to work together, because just to verify and just to confirm with you and assure you, Contract does not guarantee you one free blow at 0, that 1 HP. This is specific and exclusive toward things that self-destruct. So this includes recoil damage from, say, Substitute or Desperate, self-destruct, microwave, microshock, and whatnot. I want to say those are probably going to be included in that mix too, because they are also self-destruct on use, and if it does, that's going to make it a very nasty leg to keep in mind. But again, Substitute and Contract basically are a requirement to working together. Revenge Sword and Max Shot also can be used pretty solidly on their own as well on the teams, especially because they both have two very solid base powers there as well. But just bear in mind that one requires you to be not quite near death, but just about ready to knock on death's door. The other one requires the arm to basically be unscratched if you want to make use of it there as well. And like I said, even though Black Cruz is kind of gimmicky at first glance, and she is very particular on her turn order, she is just the same as any other KabuKuwa series, very powerful as a hybrid, as a master when it comes to hybrid combat.